Fired unfairly, she was crying alone at the bus stop, until a stranger walked up and changed everything. Sarah Miller always arrived at 6:30. She was never late, not on rainy days, not when the bus broke down, not even when her daughter got sick. She crossed the lobby in silence, greeted the security guards with a brief smile, and put on her gray uniform before the rest of the city woke up. For 11 years, she had followed the same routine at Horizon Corporation. She cleaned offices, organized break rooms, took care of spaces that would never belong to her. She knew everyone's name, but few knew hers. That Thursday morning, everything seemed normal. Except for one detail: the CEO, Michael Harris, hadn't shown up at the office. The atmosphere was strange. Whispers, closed doors. His assistant, Stephen Wright, looked restless. Phone glued to his ear, sharp eyes darting around. Sarah, as always, kept her distance. At noon, just as she was about to finish her shift, she was called to the reception desk. The secretary didn't smile as usual. She simply said curtly, "The board wants to speak with you." Sarah frowned. She walked up to the 14th floor with her heart pounding, hands sweating. She never went up there. It wasn't her world. Inside the room were Stephen, 2 HR staff members, and a man she didn't know, the company's lawyer she would later learn. No one invited her to sit. Stephen started bluntly. "Sarah, confidential documents disappeared from the director's office last night. Project codes, international contracts, $1 billion loss. Do you understand?" She didn't understand. She stayed silent. "Cameras show you leaving his office at 7:43 p.m. You were the last person to go in there." I clean that office every Tuesday and Thursday, like always." The key was on the control board. Stephen cut her off. "Only you went in. Only you came out. And now the documents are gone. We have reason to believe you took them to sell corporate espionage." "What?" Her voice cracked. I would never do that." The lawyer intervened, reading legal terms. They said there was enough evidence for termination for cause. There was no room for defense. Sarah tried to explain, but it was like talking to walls. "Someone set me up. This is a mistake," she insisted, trembling. Stephen smirked faintly. "We regret it, but the decision has been made." Sarah was escorted to the locker room. She had to hand over her badge in front of everyone. Some employees watched in silence. Others whispered. No one came near. In the elevator, with her backpack on and blurred eyes, she swallowed her tears. She left the building feeling the world grow heavier. She sat at the bus stop on Avenida das Torres, where cars sped by indifferently. She cried quietly, trying to understand how her life had turned to dust in just a few hours. That's when a man approached and sat beside her. Navy blue suit, well-trimmed beard, attentive yet calm eyes. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and offered it without saying a word. Sarah hesitated. Then she took it. "Thank you," she whispered, wiping her tears. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The man watched the street as if waiting for something. Then he asked calmly, "Were you fired?" She nodded, trying to keep her dignity. "For what reason?" Sarah thought about lying, saying it was downsizing, but she had nothing left to hide. "They said I stole documents. That I sold company secrets." The man turned his face toward her. "And did you?" She lifted her eyes, hurt by the question, but she saw he wasn't speaking with arrogance. He truly wanted to know. "Never. I don't even know what was in those papers. I only went into that office because it was my job. Always has been." He stayed quiet for a moment, then said, "That's strange. I was there yesterday. I left just before 7. I saw you cleaning the lobby windows. I was finishing my shift. And you didn't notice anything unusual?" "The director's door was open. I thought it was odd because he never leaves it like that. But I didn't touch anything. Her bus arrived." Sarah stood slowly, but the man spoke before she left. "My name is Nicholas Hayes." She simply nodded. "Sarah," she answered, barely audible. "May I look you up?" She hesitated. "Why?" Nicholas met her eyes, steady, unhurried. "Because something's not right about all this, and because I believe you." Sarah boarded the bus as though coming back from a funeral. From inside, she looked through the window. Nicholas was still there, standing, watching her as if he already knew this story wasn't going to end here. And it wouldn't. Nicholas Hayes spent the night thinking about that woman at the bus stop. Sarah. The simple name, the pain in her eyes, the firmness in her denial. She didn't seem like someone making up a story. And he had heard plenty of them before. A tech entrepreneur, founder of the startup Adari Systems, which provided services for Horizon Corporation itself, Nicholas knew the corporate backstage all too well. And he knew how to tell when someone was lying. Sarah wasn't. The next morning, he canceled 2 meetings and went back to Horizon, this time without a tie and with a temporary visitor badge. He was one of the minor investors, but he had always preferred to stay out of the spotlight. Stephen Wright walked past him without noticing. Nicholas headed to the company's IT center. He had friends there. A coffee with Jacob, a systems analyst, was enough to uncover the first lead. "Did you know Sarah was fired yesterday?" Nicholas asked casually. "The cleaning lady?" "Yeah, I heard. People are talking. Word is she stole some confidential files." "Stole? What kind?" "A new project from the international division. Went missing from Michael's office. But it's all hush-hush. Stephen kept it quiet so the press wouldn't find out." "Are there cameras in there?" "Of course." Stephen himself pulled the footage and then ordered it deleted. Said it was an internal matter. Nicholas frowned. "He ordered it deleted?" Jacob nodded, glancing around warily. "Strange, right? Very." Nicholas knew the corporation kept automatic backups on external servers. If Stephen wanted it gone, it was because he had something to hide. Nicholas wrote down the backup's name. Director Office, 7 p.m. Meanwhile, Sarah's life was crumbling. At her small apartment, she faced the hard look of her 16-year-old daughter, Chloe. "You got fired for stealing?" the girl asked, her voice low and cold. "I swear I didn't do anything. They're lying." "Mom, it's all over the school chats. Someone posted a picture of you leaving the building with a box. They're calling me the thief's daughter." Sarah's stomach sank. "Listen to me, sweetheart. Someone set me up." "And why would anyone do that to you?" The question lingered in the air. Sarah had no answer. In the hallway of her building, neighbors whispered when she walked by. Some turned their faces away. Others asked questions laced with fake pity. Even the doorman avoided looking her in the eye. Back at Horizon headquarters, Nicholas managed to access the backup. He reviewed the video. Sarah really was the last to leave the office. But there was a detail. The camera's timestamp showed 7:43 p.m. In the company's access system, Stephen's badge had been used in the same office at 8:12 p.m. Nicholas took a screenshot. In other words, Sarah wasn't the last one. At the end of the day, he passed by the bus stop where he had met Sarah. He didn't see her, but left a note with a street vendor. "If you see Sarah Miller, tell her Nicholas Hayes wants to talk. It's important." 2 days later, Sarah got the message. Suspicious, she called from a payphone. "Hello? Sarah? I'm glad you called. I need to show you something." "Why are you helping me?" Silence for 2 seconds. "Because I know what it's like to have your name dragged through the mud, and because you don't deserve this." They arranged to meet at a small cafe near downtown. Nicholas brought his laptop. He showed her the video. He showed her the access logs. "Look here, your badge registered exit at 7:45. But at 8:12, Stephen entered the office, alone, and that was erased from the internal records. I only found it because I still have access to old backups." Sarah watched the video in silence. When it ended, she murmured, went back after me, and made sure no one would know. Why would he do that? Nicholas closed the laptop. I don't know yet, but I'll find out. Sarah looked at him suspiciously, the hardened eyes of someone who had been beaten down too many times. You don't know me. You have nothing to gain from me. Nicholas sighed. When my mother died, I was 15. They said it was a medical error. The hospital blamed her, said she hadn't followed procedures, that she was negligent. But it wasn't true. She was a nurse, worked double shifts, took care of everyone. But no one wanted to investigate. So I know what it's like to scream for justice and have no one listen. Sarah lowered her head. For the first time, she believed him completely. What do I do now? Leave it to me. But I'll need your trust and patience. It's going to hurt before it gets better. She nodded, still afraid, but with a spark of hope flickering inside. That night, Sarah slept without crying, for the first time in days. Nicholas, however, spent the night reading reports. He discovered that Stephen had received an unusual sum in his account the day before the theft. He traced the source. It came from a consulting firm that worked with Horizon's competitors. Now the puzzle started to make sense. Stephen didn't just want to frame Sarah. He wanted to sell something, and he needed a scapegoat. Nicholas shut his laptop. The game had begun, and he wouldn't stop until Sarah's voice was heard. Stephen Wright was restless. In recent days, he had felt too many eyes in the hallways. Whispers. People who once obeyed him without question now hesitated. He tried to keep his composure, but the control he had always enjoyed was starting to slip through his fingers. On his office computer, a hidden folder kept the origin of it all. Edited videos, falsified files, forged records. It was there that he had orchestrated Sarah Miller's downfall. And now, something told him this story was far from over. Meanwhile, Nicholas Hayes kept silent, but went deeper with each step. Using his contacts inside Horizon's compliance department, he gained access to an internal security report. There was an anonymous complaint filed 2 days before the documents went missing, alleging that Sarah was selling information to competitors. But the IP address of the complaint didn't match any external computer. It came from the corporation's own network. Nicholas cross-referenced the data with employee login times and found what he was looking for. The terminal that had sent the complaint had been used minutes earlier by Stephen. In other words, the complaint was false, and it had a name behind it. Sarah, on the other hand, was trying to keep a routine. She looked for jobs without success, avoided leaving home. Her daughter, Chloe, was still distant, cold. The subject of the dismissal seemed like a taboo between them. One rainy morning, while washing dishes, the phone rang. Hello? On the other end, a cold, measured voice. You should know when to keep quiet. Sarah froze. Who is this? No one you need to know. Just some advice. Stop digging where you don't belong, or things could get much worse. The line went dead. She stood still, hands wet, heart pounding. It was Stephen. She knew it. The disguised voice couldn't hide the arrogant, cynical tone she had heard so many times before. She grabbed her phone and called Nicholas. Someone called me, threatened me, told me to stop. Did you recognize the voice? I think it was him. Stephen. Disguised. But it was him. Nicholas listened in silence. This changes things, he said gravely. I'll speed up the process. That afternoon, he contacted an old college friend, now head of auditing at a firm that serviced Horizon. He asked for a discrete analysis of Stephen's financial transactions. Within 48 hours, the response came. We found suspicious deposits, Nicholas. 3 large transfers in 2 months routed through a shell company. The source is tied to a foreign group that once tried to buy Horizon patents. Nicholas wrote it all down. The puzzle was fitting together. Stephen had sold information, built a sham, and used Sarah as a shield. But the game had turned more dangerous. One night, Sarah woke to a strange noise in the living room. She thought she was imagining it. But when she got up, she found the door unlocked, the window open, and the bookshelf ransacked. Nothing had been stolen, but everything was out of place. Torn papers, scattered documents. Even a photo of her and Chloe lay broken on the floor. She called Nicholas, trembling. Someone broke in, ransacked everything. They didn't take anything, just made a mess. It's intimidation. I'm scared, Nicholas. This is getting too big. I'll take care of it, I promise. The next day, Nicholas did something he usually avoided. He used his name. He called a meeting with Horizon's legal team, demanding access to internal files as a shareholder. When Stephen heard about the move, he felt panic for the first time. He went to the interim director's office. "This Nicholas Hayes is getting too involved," he said, trying to sound calm. "He's an investor, Stephen. He has every right to know what's happening here. He's trying to sabotage the company. He's involved with Sarah." The director raised his eyebrows. "Sarah? The cleaning lady?" "Exactly." "Stephen, I think you'd better start explaining yourself more clearly." Stephen left the office feeling the ground collapse beneath him. That same day, Nicholas received an envelope slid under his door. No sender. Inside, a dossier. Screenshots, emails, bank statements, access logs to the database showing evidence of the fraud. Everything in detail. At the top of the dossier, a handwritten note. He didn't do this alone. Nicholas read every page carefully. There it was. Everything needed to destroy Stephen, and maybe expose others too. On the last page, a bank statement showed a payment made directly from Stephen to a company called Cronus Consulting, a front used by groups interested in industrial espionage. Now it was no longer just a setup against a cleaning lady. It was a corporate scandal waiting to explode. Sarah received the news with a mix of relief and fear. "Is this going to leak?" she asked. "Not yet, but now we have weapons, and we'll use them with precision." Sarah took a deep breath. "Why are you doing all this, Nicholas?" He looked at her, serious. "Because this isn't just about you. It's about everything people like him think they can get away with. And because I can't stand seeing honest people pay for the crimes of others." Sarah looked out the window. The city moved on, indifferent. But something inside her was starting to change. She was no longer just a victim. She was becoming a key player in something much bigger. The Horizon Corporation's 15th floor boardroom had never been so silent. 5 directors, 2 attorneys, and Nicholas Hayes sat around the table. In front of them, a projector was on, slides ready. On the first, in bold black letters, it read, "Evidence of manipulation and internal misconduct. The Sarah Miller case." No one knew what to expect. Nicholas was a minority investor, but one with influence. And that day, he hadn't come to ask questions. He had come to present the truth. Without ceremony, he began. "What you're about to see is not a theory. It's a complete dossier. Documents, records, bank statements, falsified emails, manipulated access logs. All of them trace back to Stephen Wright's terminal. Some exchanged uneasy glances. The first slide showed the anonymous complaint against Sarah, sent from Stephen's computer. Then came the access times, the system screenshots, the original video backups, and finally, the bank transfers routed through shell companies linked to international competitors. Stephen not only planted false evidence against a cleaning staff member. He compromised the company's security, sold strategic information, and tried to cover it up by blaming someone who had no way to defend herself. Silence. "And you fired this woman for cause," Nicholas continued, without even letting her speak. The chairman of the board took a deep breath, adjusting his tie. "This is very serious, Nicholas." "Yes, it is, and it's all documented. If you don't take immediate action, I'll leak it myself to the press. I have direct contact with 3 major outlets. Within 24 hours, Horizon Corporation's name will be splashed across national headlines as the company that destroyed an innocent woman's life to protect an internal criminal. The atmosphere in the room shifted. It was no longer negotiation, it was pressure. What do you propose? First, the immediate dismissal of Stephen Wright, with a full inquiry and audit of every project he touched in the last 2 years. And Sarah? One of the directors asked cautiously. Sarah Miller will be brought back, but not as a janitor, and not in silence. I want a public apology, compensation for moral damages, and her reinstatement with recognition as a valued employee. The truth will be exposed, or you'll sink with it. Hours later, Sarah got the call. Sarah? The HR director's voice sounded polite, almost nervous. Can we talk? She thought of hanging up, but answered, Go ahead. We want to invite you back, in a special capacity, with all formal guarantees, and with our apology. Publicly? She asked bluntly. We can discuss that in person. No discussions. It's public or it's nothing. On the other end, silence. Then a sigh. Understood. The next morning, the news spread. Sarah Miller, wrongfully accused, would be reinstated with an official public apology. The press began swarming the building. Stephen felt the net closing in. Summoned to an urgent meeting, he tried to buy time. You're going to believe this guy? He's trying to take the company down from the inside. But the evidence was stacked against him. Emails, deposits, reports, all pointing his way. While everyone prepared for the press conference, Stephen moved in the shadows. He tried to access restricted folders, grabbed a flash drive of confidential files, and attempted to withdraw money from a company fund. He didn't know Nicholas had already warned security. He was intercepted in the parking lot, trying to leave in his armored car. Mr. Stephen Wright, you are under arrest for attempted bribery, data theft, and corporate fraud. He tried to resist, but it was too late. Reporters captured everything. Sarah watched it unfold on TV. Sitting on the couch, her daughter Chloe by her side, holding her hand in silence. That same afternoon, in a makeshift auditorium at Horizon headquarters, Sarah stepped onto the stage. At her side, Nicholas. In front of her, dozens of journalists, cameras, flashes. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. The company's president spoke first, issuing a formal apology. He admitted the mistake, promised internal reforms. Then, Sarah took the microphone. My name is Sarah Miller. For 11 years, I worked here as a janitor. I was never late, I never missed a day, I never stole anything, not even the right to be respected. But one day, I was treated as guilty. I was humiliated, and I almost lost my faith in people. Pause. I only didn't lose it because someone listened, because someone believed me, and because I knew I couldn't accept being crushed by a system that treats poor people as disposable. Another pause. Cameras zoomed in. Today, I return. Not because they let me come back, but because I fought to prove that the truth is worth more than any job title. I was a janitor. I am a mother. I am a woman. And now I am free from the weight of a lie. Applause, standing ovation. Nicholas looked at her with quiet pride. As they walked out together, he said, Have you ever thought about doing more with your story? Sarah looked at him. What do you mean? Turning what you lived through into something bigger. Helping others who go through the same. Building a project, a fund, a path for those who don't have a voice. She thought for a moment, then, for the first time in a long while, smiled faintly. Maybe. I've spent too long cleaning up other people's messes. Maybe now it's time to clean up an entire system. Sarah's badge now read, Coordinator of Social Projects, Horizon Humanitarian. It was new, still shining, just like everything around her. The office where she worked was small but full of ideas. Nicholas was always nearby, helping design what, for both of them, was no longer just an emergency fund, but beginning to take shape with a name: Project Justice and Dignity. The plan was clear: build a support network for workers wrongfully fired, legal assistance, psychological counseling, emergency financial aid, everything Sarah herself had never had when she needed it most. She was the face of the project, and now of hope. She began giving interviews. She spoke on TV shows, radio, social media. Her story went viral. In less than 2 weeks, her name was everywhere. Former janitor who stood up to a corporate giant and won. But behind the spotlight, not everything shone. At home, Chloe, her daughter, watched her from a distance. The smiles captured in press photos didn't repeat themselves inside their apartment. Silent dinners, short answers. "You're going out again tonight?" the teenager asked, backpack slung over her shoulders. "Just a meeting, sweetie. I'll be back early." "You always say that," Sarah tried to reach out. "I'm doing this for us, for me, for you too. But before, you were always here. Now it feels like you're in another world." Sarah wanted to respond, but froze. She knew her daughter was right. She was trying to save the world, and losing hers. At the office, Nicholas noticed. "Everything okay at home?" "No, Chloe, she feels left out. And I don't even know how to just be a mom anymore." "You became a lot of things in a short time, Sarah. It's normal to feel overwhelmed. But I don't want to turn into a symbol and lose my daughter in the process." Nicholas nodded, thoughtful. "Maybe you need to share the weight. Trust the team more. Delegate. You don't have to carry it all alone." She sighed. "I spent my whole life being invisible. Now that people finally see me, I'm afraid of disappearing again." Nicholas didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You won't disappear, because now you've left a mark, and marks don't fade." That same day, a new case reached her. A former employee of a textile multinational had been fired after reporting workplace harassment. The company accused her of insubordination. No proof, no chance to defend herself. Her name was Irene Figuera. She was 58 years old and had no chance of getting back into the job market. Sarah met her personally. "They told me you know what it's like to be stepped on," Irene said, eyes brimming. "They called me crazy, said I made it all up, threw me away." Sarah listened in silence. Every word was a mirror. "You're not alone anymore," she replied. "And your story won't end like this." That was when Sarah discovered a new role, not just survivor, but guide. But not everyone who came to her door was seeking justice. Former co-workers from cleaning services began to approach her. Some were genuine. They wanted to start over, ask for advice. Others, not so much. "Sarah, remember me? I was always your friend," said one, who had barely looked at her before. "I need a favor, an advance, a job, anything." She began to realize fame brought more than applause. It brought expectations and demands, and people trying to grab a piece of her victory. One afternoon, after an interview, she was cornered by 2 men. "Congratulations on your fight, Sarah," one of them said with a false smile. "But watch whose toes you step on. The wheel turns, doesn't it?" She caught the tone. It was a warning, a veiled threat, from someone who had lost ground with Stephen's downfall and couldn't stomach the new face now plastered across the company's walls. That night, Sarah cried in the bathroom, silently, like she used to. But now, something was different. When she came out, Chloe was awake. "Mom?" Sarah looked at her, surprised. "I know you're trying. I just miss how it used to be. Us." Sarah hugged her tightly. "Me too. I promise I'll find a way to be everything you need, without stopping being what the world needs too." The next day, she proposed something new, an anonymous hotline within the project, a channel for reporting workplace injustice, and she invited Irene to be the first to join the team. Nicholas smiled when he heard. "Now you're starting to build something bigger than yourself." Sarah looked at him. "I don't want my story to be the exception. I want it to become structure." And there, among spreadsheets, complaints, TV invitations, and conversations with her daughter, Sarah began to understand. Being a symbol was only the beginning. Now she was an agent, the root of a movement, and roots once planted are hard to tear out. The sign on the facade read in large, bold letters, "Sarah Miller Institute for Social Justice." Sarah stopped in front of the newly inaugurated building and felt her heart tighten. It wasn't vanity, it was responsibility. That name printed up there wasn't just hers. It carried the weight of all those who had been forgotten, silenced, or wronged. The headquarters took up 2 floors of a downtown building. Inside, modern offices, walls decorated with phrases of resistance, and photographs of workers from across the country. Legal teams, psychologists, social workers, and volunteers filled the halls with purpose. The emergency fund had grown. With the support of social investors, NGOs, and even private companies, the project had gained body, voice, and national reach. And Sarah was now its soul. But that didn't make the burden any lighter. In her new director's office, modest as she had requested, Sarah spent hours reviewing cases, listening to stories, deciding priorities. Fame had given way to mission, and mission to the weight of responsibility. "We're only able to respond to half of the reports we received this month," Amanda, the legal coordinator, warned. "We need more staff, more funding, more of everything." Sarah took notes, breathed deeply, and carried on. The nights were getting shorter, and the longing for her daughter longer. Chloe, now 17, spent more time with her grandparents. The bond between them, though slowly rebuilding, was still fragile. Sarah respected her daughter's space, but it hurt. Nicholas, always nearby, noticed the strain. "You've done a lot already. Maybe it's time to pause a little," he suggested one day. "Pause for what?" "To remember that you're human too, and this institute needs you whole, not just present." She smiled, weary. "I spent my whole life being less. Less important, less heard, less seen. Now that I'm more, I don't know how to switch it off." Nicholas understood and respected that. Despite their growing closeness, they never crossed boundaries. The connection was deep, but grounded in respect and purpose. Both knew that, at that moment, the love they shared was for the cause. The Institute was making noise. Landmark cases were being won, workers reinstated, companies punished. A new anonymous reporting channel, Just Line, received hundreds of complaints each week. Sarah had become a constant presence in public debates and congressional hearings. Her name was no longer just a symbol of survival. It was synonymous with justice. Then came the big day, a public ceremony to mark the Institute's 6-month anniversary. It would be broadcast live with officials, press, and representatives from across the country. Sarah hesitated to accept being the center of the event, but she gave in, not out of vanity, but out of representation. The auditorium was packed, more than 500 people, standing in the aisles, crowds outside watching on a big screen, a sea of diverse faces, workers, mothers, students, community leaders. Sarah stepped onto the stage with firm steps. The spotlight blinded her for an instant, but when she began to speak, everything around her disappeared. "I'm not here as a heroine. I'm not special. I was just a woman who shouted when they tried to silence me. But what frightens me most is thinking of how many voices are still trapped." She looked at the audience. "This institute isn't about me. It's about you, about all of us who have been pushed into silence. Today we have a place, and tomorrow we'll have many more." As she spoke, she didn't notice the movement at the back of the auditorium. Someone entered quietly. head down. Chloe. The teenager watched her mother on stage, eyes brimming. It was the first time she had ever seen Sarah speak live. And there, in the middle of the crowd, she saw her mother not as a symbol, but as a strong, honest, tireless woman. After the speech, a standing ovation. People moved, people crying. Chloe walked closer. Sarah, still on stage, spotted her and froze for a moment. She hurried down the steps. The two met in the middle of the crowd. No words, just an embrace, long, real, unbreakable. The photographers captured it. The image spread across the country. The woman who had defeated the system, embracing her daughter, a return to the beginning. Only this time, with her head held high. The next morning, while having coffee in the Institute's office, Sarah was surprised by an unexpected visit. A representative from the Ministry of Justice. "Mrs. Sarah Miller, the government has been following the Institute's work, and we want to make you a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" "To make the Institute a national model, replicate its structure in every capital, and if you agree to lead this project alongside the ministry." Sarah stayed silent. Her hands trembled slightly on the cup. "That's a lot," she murmured. "But there's no one better than you for this. You lived it. You felt it. You built it." Nicholas at her side just observed. He knew this was another step, and Sarah, looking out the window at the city's movement, thought of everything she had left behind. The uniform, the badge, the bus stop, the fear. Now she was the one paving the way. "I need time to think." "Of course," the representative said. "But know that this opportunity is rare, and the country needs more Sarahs." She smiled, not as a symbol, but as a woman who knew her own worth. The Institute was standing tall, and the future ready to bloom. The leather chair was comfortable, but Sarah preferred to stand. In front of her, a team of documentarians adjusted cameras, lights, microphones. The setting was sober, modern. Behind her, the sign of the Sarah Miller Institute for Social Justice, now present in 23 states across the country. Sarah was 50 years old. Her gray hair showed proudly. She wore simple, discreet clothes, but carried a steadiness in her gaze no one dared to question. She was now an advisor to the institute she had founded, mentor to new leaders, and a national reference in social justice. The interviewer, a young reporter, straightened the papers in front of her. "Shall we begin?" Sarah nodded. The red light on the camera blinked on. "Mrs. Miller, after everything you've lived through, if you had to point to the worst day of your life, which would it be?" She smiled. Not a cynical smile, not a bitter one. A smile full of truth. "The worst," she repeated, glancing down for a moment. "It was the best one, disguised as tragedy." The reporter raised her eyebrows. "What do you mean?" "The day they called me a thief. The day they sent me away like trash. That day, it was rock bottom. But down there is where I discovered my roots." Silence. The camera kept rolling. Sarah drew a deep breath. "Some people think life is built by climbing upward. I learned that to truly grow, you first have to dig in. Into loss, into pain. That's where I found strength. And from there, I never fell again." The crew exchanged discreet glances. Those words, raw, unpolished, were worth more than any script. Hours later, far from the cameras, Sarah asked the driver to take a detour on the way home. She wanted to visit a place. The car stopped at Avenida das Torres, the same bus stop where, years ago, she had sat crying, her life in pieces. Now, instead of the rusted old structure, there was a small memorial, a wooden bench, a bronze plaque, plants around it. The inscription read, "Here, a new story began. Sarah Miller, a symbol of dignity." She walked up slowly, ran her hand over the plaque, sat down on the bench just like before, closed her eyes. She remembered the box in her hands, the shame, the feeling of the end. But now, there was no pain in that place, only strength. Then an older woman approached. White hair tied in a bun, a familiar expression. "Mrs. Miller?" she asked, voice trembling. "Yes? My name is Irene. You helped me years ago. I worked in textiles, was fired unjustly. You listened to me, gave me a voice. I just wanted to thank you and tell you that today I'm a project coordinator at the Institute in New York." Sarah smiled, moved. "I remember you, Irene." Then a young man with an Institute badge stepped forward. "Mrs. Miller, what an honor to see you here. I joined the Institute as an intern. My mother was supported by you when she lost everything. Today, I'm a lawyer. I'm helping others like her. 3 more people came, then 2 more. The bus stop became a gathering place, stories woven together by an invisible thread leading back to her." Sarah stayed silent for a while, listening, smiling, embracing. Then she stood, looked at the horizon of the city unfolding ahead. "I wasn't the one who changed the world," she said, more to herself than to the others. "I was only the beginning." And in that moment, the sun began to sink behind the buildings. Golden light washed over the sidewalk, over faces, over stories. The place where everything had once collapsed was now the mark of where everything had blossomed. The memorial wasn't about her. It was about what she had awakened in others. About the strength everyone carries, and that sometimes only needs someone to believe in it. Before leaving, Sarah pulled a folded paper from her pocket. It was an old, yellowed sheet, the note Nicholas had left her years ago. "If you find Sarah Miller, tell her Nicholas Hayes wants to speak with her. It's important." She still kept it. She stood from the bench, walked slowly back to the car, and before getting in, looked back one last time. She smiled. The world had tried to bury her, but it forgot she was a seed. Sarah showed that even from rock bottom, strength can grow. And you? Have you ever lived through or witnessed an injustice that left its mark on you? Drop "root of justice" in the comments, because every fight starts from a single point. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. That way, this message of courage and dignity can reach even further.